Okay, so um, we are now on Unit 4, which is called Transoceanic Interconnections from 1450 to 1750. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is some of the big changes from Unit 3 to Unit 4. And on the handout, or on the screen, first of all, one of the things I want you to take note of is that this is actually a globe of the world, a map of the world. And I bet we can like identify. So like if I called on, I don't know, Nevaeh or something like that, I bet like she could get this. So if you look at this right here, this is Europe over here. And you should probably identify this super important island that impacts all of our daily lives. That is England. Good job, Ariel. And right next to England is this island of angry redheads. That would be Ireland. Good job, Ella. And so here's Spain. And what continent would this be then? That's Africa, right? Oh, did you say something, Nevaeh? So, oh, yeah, you repeated what Ariel said. That's right. I agree with that. So here's Africa, here's Europe. And if that's true, then what is this, all this right here? That would make sense, but it's not.
Canada. Oh, isn't it south, like the other side?
13 colonies. I'm like,
No, there's no 13 colonies at this time. No.
India.
This is China, right? This is China over here.
It's like a
I mean,
circle V.
right next to
And so there's something that's missing here in this map. If this is Asia, because it is, this is Asia, and this is Europe, and this is Africa, what's missing? Okay, for sure, Australia's missing, but maybe something bigger than Australia.
oh, I got you.
Japan.
Canada.
America.
So listen, North and South America are not on this map.
Oh.
North and South America are not on this map. And that's because in 1450, Christopher Columbus, in 1492, Christopher Columbus had no idea there was such a thing as North and South America. You know, Christopher Columbus, his whole goal, his whole desire was that he thought, I'm going to leave from Spain and I want to get to India. I'm going to get to Asia. And to get there, I'm going to sail across the ocean. But he miscalculated the circumference of the Earth. He thought the Earth was about a third smaller than it was. And he thought that if you just sail west, you're going to make it to these islands called the Indies. If you just sail west, you can make it to China. If you sail west, and you can, because the Earth's a globe. But he didn't know about North and South America. And when he gets there, he doesn't even realize he got somewhere new. Actually, Christopher Columbus died thinking he was in Asia. He never realized he had discovered anything new to the day that he died. So, well, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So what we're going to talk about today is like this changing of the world. In fact, we're going to write down the first line that the linking of the Eastern and Western hemispheres by Columbus. You know, that's the thing Columbus does is that he puts together, he links the Eastern and Western hemispheres. Columbus isn't like noteworthy because he was like a good guy. Like he did terrible things. But he's noteworthy because before Christopher Columbus, the world was not globally connected like it would be with him. So the linking of the Eastern and Western Hemisphere by Columbus. And we also see in our time frame is 1450 to 1750, we see the establishment of maritime empires. Now, before we go further, what does that word maritime mean? What does that word maritime mean? Okay. It has to do with the ocean. Like if it has to do with the sea, it has to do with the ocean. So what we see at this time for the first time is the establishment of maritime empires by Europe. We haven't talked about Europe as like a superpower in the world yet because they haven't been. We've talked a lot about land-based empires. You know, we talked about the Mughal, the Safavid, the Ottoman, and the Qing. But we haven't talked really about Europe. And that's because they haven't been as important on a global stage as they're about to be from 1450 to 1750. And we're going to see that they're going to start maritime empires. They're going to have these sea-based empires. We're also going to see on the handout on the third line, we're going to see the global exchanges across the Atlantic and the Pacific. So it used to be that those two oceans, the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, were barriers. It used to be, the Pacific Ocean's the largest ocean in the world. It used to be a barrier, but what we're going to see in Unit 4 is that it turns out that the Pacific Ocean, it's not even big enough to stop this international trade and travel. It's going to be a huge change. So that's a big change, right? The next line, what kind of things are now going to be moving across this globe? Well, people, plants, animals, and one more thing, what else is going to move across the world? Disease. So we have 4 things where it says this moves people, plants, animals, and diseases. So there was never any white people in America until after 1492. There's never black people in America after 1492. There was never any Asians from Asia proper before 1492. And so we have all these changes that we're going to be talking about in this unit that happened after 1492. People, plants, animals, and disease. And it's going to change not America forever, it's going to actually change the world forever. So it's kind of a pretty important unit that we're going to be studying here. Now, we also see some things that are going to continue to be a factor. In fact, where it says continuity of, we're going to see a continuity of the gunpowder empires. We talked about the gunpowder empires in Unit 3. We took a test on them yesterday. And we're going to continue to see issues of the gunpowder empires in our Unit 4. But if that's the continuity, there's a huge change. And the last thing on this section, the biggest change is the growing power of this continent. Which continent we've already hinted at is going to become super powerful? Europe is, right? Europe is going to be the super powerful continent, which is why, like, the most widespread language in the world today is what language? English. I mean, again, if you look at the map, here's England. England is a ridiculously small island. 1,000 years ago, if we were making bets and say, hey, let's make a bet about which country is going to have the most widespread influential language on the planet, no one's going to bet English. Like, why would you bet English? It's not even the largest European country, but that's the world that we live in today. So we're going to see in this unit the growing influence and power of Europe. So how do we get there? Well, we need to look at technology, is how this interconnected world is even possible. So where it says 4.1, we're going to talk about today technological innovations. In fact, today, something you should be able to walk away with is we should be able to know and describe how did cross-cultural interactions spread technology and facilitate changes in trade and travel from 1450 to 1750. So one of the things we're going to be looking at is that to sail across the ocean blue in 1492, it's not because Chris Columbus and white Europeans invented everything that there was, and and Asians had never had contributions, Muslims didn't have contributions, it's just white Europeans that did it all. That's not the case at all. In fact, it says on the handout that what we're going to see is that some Asian inventions were adopted, used, and improved by Europeans. So some Asian inventions were adopted, used, and improved by Europeans. 3 different things. Adopted, used, and improved by Europeans. And actually that helped them to take to the sea. So white Europeans aren't going to go into exploration because of just stuff that they invented, stuff they made up. They are adopting, they're using, and they're improving things that had existed prior. We're going to give you just a couple of examples. One example, there's something they get from China, and we've talked about this before. This is like the most basic thing you need if you're traveling, you don't want to get lost. You need a what? Yeah, right. Number 1, the compass. That's not something that they get. Good job, Alexa. That's not something that they get. That's not something they invent themselves. They get that from China. So if we're talking about Christopher Columbus, we're talking about white Europeans going to the New World. That's great. But they couldn't have done that without technology that already existed and existed in other cultures. Where it says China, number 1, we'll write down the compass. Number 2, there's another thing that they got. We've actually talked about this before. It's kind of a funny word because it's not like as common as the compass. There's something you'll write down for number 2 called the astrolabe. And that's astro, like our baseball team,
Is it the star thing?
It has to do with stars, and it's astrolabe, Labe, at the end of astro. And the thing about the astrolabe is also white Europeans got this from a non-white European country. This actually came from, you'll write down, the Muslim world. So Muslim astronomers and Muslim scientists had invented the astrolabe, but white Europeans, they adopted it and they used it. And what are you using it for? Well, it says for letter B, this lets sailors find out how far north or south they were from the equator. That's what you could calculate with the astrolabe, and how far north or south you are from the equator. And that's kind of important because it's one thing, if you get lost like on a road trip, that's fine because you're going to eventually find a river or find a road or find a town or find a village. What's going to happen to you if you get lost in the Pacific Ocean? You're going to die, right? So it's like really important that before we can be able to like sail 1,000 miles away, we have a sense that we know where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. And that's what the compass and the astrolabe help Europeans figure out. Number 3, there's another invention that is important. And this invention is actually a white European invention. We haven't talked about it yet, but we'll write it down for number 3. There's something called the caravel, and that's spelled Caravel. The caravel, Caravel. And this is actually a small ship, and it's actually small on purpose. We've talked about other ships like at this time period that were actually like China. You might remember China had like these ridiculously huge ships, and they were like football field like in size. In fact, they were able to fit like giraffes on board. Who had that? Not the Mongols. The Chinese did. Who's their guy? Noah is not the right answer.
Noah from Noah and the Ark.
Yeah, Ella, correct again. Start with a Z. That guy's name was Zheng He, right? And you might remember he had these huge treasure ships. Now, these caravels, they're not big at all. And you might think, well, how's that even a vocabulary word? Why do I need to fill that in a blank? These are not big. Well, it's actually good that they're not big because if you're a big ship, and let's say that you're exploring these islands, you're a big ship, say you're exploring a place you've never been, what could happen to your big football field sized ship if you get too close to a coast that you've never been to?
You get spotted and killed by people that are already there.
Okay, that's a possible interesting answer. That's not what I was looking for, but good job. You could actually get stuck, like if it's not very deep,
Die because you get spotted.
No, that was a good try, That was a good answer.
Kind of, but
I see where you're going with that. But listen, if you have a big ship, you can get stuck, like you may not know, and that could also mean that you're dead. The cool thing about these ships, these caravels, they're small, they're easy to navigate, and also they could get right along the coast without worried, oh, we're gonna run aground and it's gonna be a problem. Also, like even if they like come along a coast and there's like a river, they're small ships, they could actually just sail up the river and explore some more. So all these different things are possibilities. It says the caravel was small ship, easy to navigate, and it developed by the Portuguese in the 15th century. It allowed sailors to survive storms and explore, you'll write down, the coastline. Explore the coastline. So it actually says it for you for number 3. It says it was developed by the Portuguese. What's that? So
First one's Caravel.
the first blank is caravel. The caravel, Caravel, was a small ship that was easy to navigate, developed by the Portuguese, and allowed sailors to survive storms because like the boats were not going to be broken up. They're not like huge, like, oh, you got to be really careful. They're delicate, and you could explore the coastline. Okay, so that's some technology, and the big takeaway is 2 of these 3 pieces of technology they got from someone else. 2 of these 3 things they got from non-white Europeans. So it's really a collaboration of human effort. Now, why though? That's like how I go across the ocean with this technology. But here's a follow-up question is why? Why are there so many white Europeans leaving Europe at this time? Well, there's a couple reasons. Number 1 is you'll write down growing population. There's a growing population in Europe. And this is actually problematic because if there's more and more people, then there was the perception that, well, there's just not enough land, there's not enough resources, there's not enough opportunity. And it meant that there was, we'll write down, limited opportunities for European workers. So the growing population in Europe meant that there was limited opportunities for European workers. So people felt like, you know what, Europe, there's just too many people. I think we should like go somewhere else where I have a chance. And maybe I could like stay in Europe, but I'm never going to escape poverty. Maybe I could stay in Europe, but I'm never going to like be anything. But if I take a risk, if I go to America, maybe I could like accomplish things I could have never dreamed about doing before. And there's a second reason. Not only are people going for like economics, but people go for religious reasons as well. In fact, for number 2, it says that religious minorities were looking for a place to have freedom of religion. Number 2, it says religious minorities were looking for a place to have freedom of religion. You might remember our story of Thanksgiving. What group of people comes over for Thanksgiving? Pilgrims. And there's a related word to the Pilgrims who also settle in Massachusetts. Those people are called some of you are this role in the musical.
Puritans.
Puritans, right? So there's Puritans, and both Pilgrims and Puritans were kind of like, what's up?
How did you know that?
Puritans?
No,
I mean,
no, I
that's,
know you know Puritans are. How did you know that we Puritans in the show?
I mean, who doesn't know that? It's kind of common knowledge, Nathan. Thanks, Nathan Wilbrick. So Puritans and Pilgrims, they were both originally part of, what is the church called that they came from? And they weren't satisfied with it. In fact, they wanted to purify it, which was they were called Anglicans, right? They were part of the Church of England. But the thing is, like, they wanted to fix the Church of England, but the Church of England didn't want to be fixed. And so, like, the Puritans and the Pilgrims thought, you know what? We are leaving England, and we're going to, like, practice our religion the way we think we should practice it. And so they were a religious minority. And they thought, you know what? It'd be better if we go to Massachusetts. It'd be better if we try the New World. So religious minorities were looking for a place to have freedom of religion. That's how we even get the Pilgrims to Massachusetts. Okay, so we have, how do they do it? We have 3 pieces of technology. We have 2 reasons why they do it. But let's look at some other motivating factors. And one of the things has to do with what they were used to getting out of Asia. It says in the next section, development of transoceanic travel and trade. It says on the handout that Europeans had long wanted, I want you to write down, luxury items from Asia. They had long wanted luxury items from Asia. And the thing is, like, Europe knew about Asia. There was a couple ways they knew about Asia. One way that was like really popular, you might remember there's this white guy from Italy, and he actually worked in China, and he worked for Kublai Khan and wrote a book about it. And when he came back, white Europeans read this book like, man, if what you're saying about China is true, this is like the most amazing place ever. We need to go there like yesterday. Who wrote that book? Who? Marco Polo, right? Marco Polo was a white Italian guy. He ended up going to China and worked there. And then he wrote about it. And all the other Europeans listened and like, wow, that's an amazing story. So that was like one way they got exposed. There's a second way. You might remember that there was like a series of wars that white Europeans fought in the Middle East, that they had a desire to like free the Middle East. Muslims had taken over Jerusalem. And the Pope Urban II said, we need to free the Middle East. God wills it. And don't worry about dying, because if you die in this war, you'll actually go to heaven. Those series of wars were called the Crusades. Now, the Crusades were a failure. Like, the Christian Europeans didn't win the Crusades, but there was an important impact of the Crusades. Because if I'm living in the Middle East and I've never been, guess what? I'm seeing food I've never had before. I'm seeing products I've never had before. I'm going to see coffee, tea, pasta, paper, and sugar. And white Europeans, after the war's over and they go back home, they're like, you know what I really miss? I miss sugar. I miss having coffee and tea. And so the cool thing about the Crusades is that even though it was a failure, it kind of like exposed people to what was out there, and they wanted to have more and more and more of it. So it says on the handout, there's a couple of examples of items that were luxury items. We'll write down 3. We'll write down spices, Well, we'll write down 4. Spices, tea, sugar, and silk. Spices, tea, sugar, and silk. Can you imagine having no sugar in your diet? Well, if you took out all the sugar in your diet, you're closer to what a white European was living. I mean, that sounds terrible to me. Because, like, what's the only natural sweetener you could use if there's no sugar? Which kind? Honey, right? That was the only thing they had. And that's, like, fine, but it's not the same, right? It's not the same. None of you are like, oh, you know what would make this cake better if we just put honey in it instead of, like, putting sugar.
You like honey?
I don't get that, but that's fine. So yeah, like Europeans want that kind of stuff. Can you imagine cooking without cinnamon or pepper or like literally any spice? All those things grow in the tropics. Like pepper doesn't grow in Europe, sugar doesn't grow in Europe. And because Europe's a cold northern continent, they didn't have that. So it's like, oh, I can like put salt on my food or maybe some salt, like, and that's what they had. So because it was so rare and like you're buying pepper that originally came from like random island in the Indian Ocean, what's going to be true of the price of something like pepper?
Expensive.
It was like worth its weight in gold. Like if you went to someone's house and they had pepper on the table, you're like, dang, okay, fancy. You're like, this is like a rich person. So these were all luxury products that Europe wanted. Now there's a problem though with these products that they want. And the problem is like, how do you get those products? Let's look at a different map. So here's a map of the world. And here's Europe right here, right? We're familiar with Europe. This is where white Europeans live. And here's India. And then there's like all these islands here. And this is where like a lot of these spices come from. And then China's here. And that's where silk comes from. And there's a trade route already. There's 2 trade routes. What trade route goes from China to Europe over land? What's that called? It's called the Silk Road. And what's this trade route that connects all these islands to Africa?
Transatlantic trade route.
The Indian Ocean Trade Network.
That one.
So that's cool and all. But what's going to happen to, let's say that I go to China and like, this is literally where they're making like silk outfits. And then the guy who makes it sells it to this guy, who sells it to this guy, who sells it to this guy, who sells it to this guy, and sells it to a white guy.
It's getting a lot of profit.
It's going to get more expensive, right? Like every time, and you can leave the door open, every time you exchange hands, the price goes up because like I want to make a profit. So every step along the way, man, the price goes up. And what's the religion that pretty much dominates this part of the world right here? Islam, right? And so these Muslims, they're like the ones who are going to actually do the final handoff to Europe. And they're going to raise prices. And I don't fault them. Like, that's how we all like make money, like if you go out to eat in a restaurant, go to across the street to Cuban Cafe, it doesn't cost that much for coffee beans and milk, but you're going to pay like a lot of money. They're the middleman. You're going to pay those higher prices. Well, it says on the handout that the trade with Asia was dominated by Muslim middlemen. By Muslim middlemen. These were the people that were like doing that final handoff. And this extra exchange, you'll write down increased prices. Like that's what happened. Prices are going to go up. Every step along the way, prices are going to go up. So Europeans want the sugar, they want the spice, but you know what they don't want? They don't want the high prices. So they need to figure out a solution. How can I, as a white European, I live here in Europe, I want sugar, I want spices from India, but I don't want to have to deal with these people. And so that means I cannot go by land because these Muslims control everything. That means I need to sail there. But if I'm going to sail from Spain to India, what do I have to get around first? What's in the way physically? What's that? No. What big body of land is in the way? Looking at the map. I'm here. Africa's in the way. Africa's right here. Good job, Nevaeh. And so they got to figure out, can I sail around Africa? And actually they didn't know. Like no white person had ever sailed All they knew is Africa starts here and like goes down forever. And they didn't know, does it like go to the southern tip of the, the South Pole? Like, can you even like go around it? I don't know. No one had ever done that. And so it says Europeans were looking for a direct way to Asia and to avoid, we're going to write down one more time, Muslim middlemen. They want to avoid those Muslim middlemen because every step along the way, prices go up. So we need to figure this out. Avoid Muslim middlemen. So how do they do that? Well, they're going to turn again to technology. It says on your handout that Europeans picked up and sometimes improved pre-existing Asian technology. Europeans picked up and sometimes improved pre-existing Asian technology. The point that I'm making here is that it's not like, oh, white people, they did this. Europeans, they're the ones who came up with everything. Europeans could not have done any of these things without other cultures inventing the compass, without other cultures inventing the astrolabe. It's not like white Europeans did everything, but the things that they did was only because of collaboration of other cultures. In fact, it says this, cross-cultural interactions had most famously taken place here, where Islamic rule brought Islamic scholars and ideas into Europe. You might remember that in Western Europe, there was one place that Muslims actually physically took over from 711 to 1492. And when Muslims ruled this part of Europe, Muslim scholars and Jewish scholars and Christian scholars, they all like group projected it and they worked together. And that meant you had the smartest Muslims, the smartest Christians, smartest Jews all working together. And that's actually really a great environment. What part of Europe was that where they worked together? Spain, but there's a special name for Muslim Spain we want to write down. Does any? It starts with an A, yeah. Okay, so we'll write down Muslim Spain. The word for it is Al-Andalus. That's two words. Al is A-L, and it's a dash, and then we have Andalus, which is A-N-D-A-L-U-S. Al-Andalus. And so that's where you have all this exchange. On the back side, now we have to like practically start thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to like pay for this? Because it costs to like explore parts of the world you've never been. And even like today, who's like helping pay for like exploration to space? Like who's actually trying to make it where people can go to space, not for science, not for NASA, but like for
Elon Musk.
yeah, like, and not just Elon Musk, but who else? Jeff Bezos. So the guys who own Amazon and the guy who owns Tesla, who lives in Austin, Texas, they want to make it that you could just like go to space for like a vacation, not for science, not for NASA, just for going, right? So we have a long history of rich people putting their money behind travel, and nothing's different. Back at this time, the most famous European leader to be an early investor in technology and exploration was from Portugal. And the guy's name you should know, his name was Henry the Navigator. His name was Henry the Navigator. And he's like an Elon Musk kind of guy. You know, he's got money. He's going to put it behind exploration. Now, it says on the next line that Henry the Navigator, that he actually never sailed himself. Like he never left Portugal, but he rather on the handout, he sponsored exploration. So he paid the bill. Like if you were saying, hey, I want to take a trip, I want to map the coast of Africa, Henry the Navigator says, that's cool, I got your back. I'm going to support you. I'm going to put my money into that. He sponsored exploration. And really, slowly Europeans made their way south along the coast of Africa. You got to figure out Africa. And listen, we got to get around it because Africa's cool and all, but that's not my main goal. My main goal is Asia. My main goal is India. And there's some interesting things about Africa, don't get me wrong. In fact, a couple things we want to write down. Number one, they were interested, and it'd be cool if we got access to African gold. There was gold in Africa. In fact, what guy most famously popularized the existence of African gold? Mansa Musa, right? Like everyone knows Mali, right? And so there is gold there. That's cool. But more importantly, number two, they wanted a sea route to Asia. Like Asia is everything. Africa's cool. It's interesting, but Africa's not the main show. Plus, Africa has a problem because every time white people go to Africa at this time, they die because there's this disease that they get from mosquitoes. That disease is called,
Black plague.
no.
Wait, what are you talking about? Mosquitoes.
What's it called? No, bubonic plague comes from
That's like
fleas. No, not Black Death.
Oh, rabies.
Rabies is not from mosquitoes.
Malaria.
It's malaria.
Malaria.
See, I remember
Said
you said
that.
that.
Oh.
You said no, it's not malaria.
I didn't hear. I'm so sorry. As an older guy, my hearing's
My
not.
friend
What?
has malaria.
For real?
Yeah, I know her.
Where?
Oh, Layla.
Where'd she get it?
I don't know. She came back from her.
Oh, from Costa Rica or whatever? I don't think she has malaria.
She has bumps all over her legs. And
That's
she has
not
her
malaria.
leggings, and Coach Lee told us not to touch her else we'll get infected.
No, that's not malaria.
Look at the
But you get malaria. Malaria is like, if you get malaria, you'll know you have malaria. It's like the worst flu you've ever had.
You can get that from Costa Rica?
Well, I mean, I think technically it's possible, but the amount of malaria in North and South America is almost none. But you can get malaria very commonly in Africa. I have a friend who lives in Uganda, and she got malaria just recently. It's a pretty terrible thing. And before medicine, if a white person got malaria, like 60% chance you're dead. So because of that, they're like, you know what? Africa's cool, but I'm not going to hang out here. I really just want to get to Asia. Number three, a third thing that they were interested in was an alliance with against Muslims with a legendary, you'll write down, Christian king. So there, like there's like legends, like, oh, the legend of Bigfoot, and it's not like anything real, but I'm sure there was like something weird that white people saw, and they thought, oh, there must be like a Bigfoot out there. Well, there was a legend that there was like this Christian king that lived in Africa, and supposedly this Christian king's name was Prester John, and supposedly that he was out there. And if we just like sail enough around Africa, we could find this guy. Now, this was just a legend. There was no Christian king named Prester John, but there's probably a reason why white Europeans came up with this. You might remember that this probably came from a real African Christian kingdom. You might remember that there was a Christian country in Africa since the 300s, that they had been Christian longer than the Irish have been Christian. What is the longest lasting continuous Christian empire in Africa? It does start with an E.
Egypt.
Not Egypt, because Egypt got conquered by Muslims.
No.
It's Ethiopia. So we'll write down the Christian kingdom of Ethiopia. All right, advances in ideas and equipment. Europeans built on previously existing, you'll write down the word star charts. You might remember the movie Mulan, and like there's like a whole song about how they use the stars to find out where they are. Well, that's true, and everyone did except white Europeans wrote that star information down into books. These books are called star charts. And so they are using something to help them guide their ship's directions. And these star charts are not things that Europeans invented. These had actually been used in ancient China. So this is another example of taking something that has already existed, maybe improving it a little, but for sure, not something that was like a white European invention. It says on the handout, there was an invention that they came up with in the scientific revolution that helped them improve this chart. And you'll write down that European telescopes helped improve these charts. So there is a lot of borrowing from other cultures. Other borrowing, you should be able to identify this. Europeans also adopted the use of this Indian Ocean sail. You might remember there's this sail that allows me to go against the wind. It's called the Lateen sail. That's Lateen, the Lateen sail. And that's pretty cool. Last three lines. After 1450, we have some long-term results. After 1450, there was the expansion of, we'll write down, global trade and exploration. Global trade and exploration. We're not talking about regional trade. There's always been an Indian Ocean Trade Network. There's always been a trans-Saharan, but we're talking about global. We're talking about crossing the Atlantic and the Pacific. We're saying that the Pacific Ocean isn't big enough to stop humans anymore. We also see the introduction and the improvement of something from China that Europeans use for their fighting. What do the Chinese invent?
Cannon? No.
What was that?
Cannon?
More broadly,
Gunpowder.
gunpowder. The introduction and improvement of Chinese gunpowder helped Europeans have empire. And so a lot of times in this like time, you think, oh, okay, this is when white people conquered the world, and they did, but white Europeans could not have conquered the world without an Asian invention that made it possible, gunpowder. And last of all for today, a reforming Peter the Great. He brought back advisors from Germany to, and what is Peter the Great's whole thing he wants to do for Russia? To modernize his navy and army. That's Peter the Great.
Germany to what?
To modernize his navy and his army. And with that, we're done with lesson 4.1. We learned today how cross-cultural interactions spread technology that led to changes in trade and travel from 1450 to 1750. There will be no homework today. I look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. Have a super great day.
Tomorrow.